Claire's hands tightened around the steering wheel as the last sign of familiarity disappeared behind her. She had driven for hours along the winding roads, the golden leaves of early autumn brushing the edges of her vision, until the horizon stretched into emptiness. Where she had expected to see the quaint red brick facade of her hometown, the church steeple piercing the sky, or even the weathered gas station she had once begged her parents to stop at, there was nothing. Only wide-open fields, scattered trees, and roads that led to nowhere. Panic twisted her stomach. She tried to call out the street names she knew, but even her voice sounded wrong, swallowed by the vast silence that surrounded her. Her hometown, the place she had been born and raised, the streets she had walked, the faces she had loved, seemed to have been erased from existence. Not even Google Maps had a record of it. She had double-checked on her phone before setting out, but every search returned a blank, a location not found error that made her fingers shake. Claire parked at the side of the road, breathing in sharply, the crisp air tasting metallic in her mouth. The wind moved strangely through the open fields, carrying sounds that she couldn't immediately recognize, the distant clatter of shutters, the faint murmur of voices, laughter that felt both familiar and impossibly far away. Her chest tightened. It was like arriving in a dream where she knew the scenery intimately, yet none of it responded to her memory. She pulled out a small photograph from her glove box, a snapshot of the main street, taken 10 years ago. The old bakery on the corner, the faded brick of her elementary school, the lampposts lining the sidewalks, they all existed on the paper, every detail etched into its glossy surface. She held it up to the horizon. Nothing matched. Not a single building, not a single sign. Panic began to gnaw at her as she drove further along the empty streets, or what she thought were streets. The asphalt gave way to dirt paths, the houses that should have lined the road reduced to skeletal frames, or missing entirely, leaving only foundations covered in weeds. Her heart pounded in her ears. "This isn't possible," she whispered to herself, gripping the wheel as though it were a lifeline. Every instinct screamed that she should turn back, call someone, anyone, to tell her she was imagining things, but she didn't. Something inside her demanded she go forward, to find the heart of the town she had known all her life, to uncover why it had been erased. As twilight descended, the shadows deepened unnaturally. The air grew heavier, thick with a dampness that smelled faintly of earth and smoke, though no fire burned anywhere. She drove past the old playground she had frequented as a child, swings creaking in the wind, but the colors were muted, the swings hanging at impossible angles, almost floating above the ground. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure there, a child in a red coat, spinning in slow circles, but when she blinked, it was gone. Goosebumps spread across her arms. Something about this place resisted her presence. It wasn't just missing from maps and records, it didn't want to be remembered. The sun dipped lower, and the sky turned a deep violet, casting the fields in dusky shadows. Claire reached what should have been Main Street, but instead of the familiar cluster of shops and cafes, there was a single lantern flickering in the distance. It was small, almost imperceptible, a pinprick of light in the growing darkness. She felt an irresistible pull toward it, as though it were guiding her, offering the first hint that the village still existed somewhere, just not in the ways she understood. Her car tires crunched over the gravel, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent night. Each step closer to the lantern amplified her unease, as though the night itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. When she reached the lantern, the outlines of houses emerged. Faint, shadowy, and incomplete, as if reality itself was sketching them in only for her eyes. Windows glimmered with light that disappeared when she tried to look closer, doors seemed to shift subtly in the corner of her vision. She stumbled out of the car, hands trembling, unable to tear her eyes from the phantom village. The silence was oppressive, broken only by a faint rustle. Was it wind, or movement among the shadows? Claire stepped toward the nearest house. Her reflection flickered in the window, but it wasn't quite right. She raised her hand, and the image of her hand moved a moment too slowly, like a film reel playing incorrectly. A voice whispered from behind her, soft and almost drowned in the wind, "You shouldn't be here." She spun around. No one was there. The lantern swayed in the breeze, casting dancing shadows across the road. Her pulse raced. Every instinct told her to run, to drive away, to call someone, anyone, but she couldn't. She had to know. She had to see the place that had shaped her, even if it no longer existed the way she remembered. Then the first figure appeared, faint, flickering, indistinct. A man standing in the middle of what should have been the square, waving at her. His features were familiar, impossibly so, but as she blinked, his face melted into the next figure, a child, a woman, someone she recognized from years past, all layered on top of one another in an unsettling blur. She took a step forward. The figures vanished. Her pulse echoed in her ears. The village was there, she realized, but only partially, only fleetingly, and only at night. And it seemed to be watching her, testing her, almost alive. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She was standing on the edge of her own memory, the first night of a journey that would unravel everything she thought she knew. And in that moment, Claire understood the horrifying truth: her hometown, her life, might never have existed the way she remembered, or at all. Claire reaches the phantom village, the town of her memory erased from maps and reality, and begins to notice strange, shifting figures at night. Claire's legs ached as she wandered further into the shadowy streets, each step a battle against the disorienting twilight that seemed to cling to her like a second skin. The village stretched around her, familiar yet alien, as though memory had sculpted it imperfectly. She passed what should have been the town square, but instead of the fountain she had played near as a child, there was only a cracked cobblestone circle, dry and silent, a shallow pit echoing with the whispers of a past that might never have existed. Her fingers traced the rough stone, and she felt an odd warmth radiate from beneath, as if the memory of her childhood were embedded in it, insisting on recognition. She closed her eyes and tried to picture the fountain in her mind, the way the water had sparkled under the sun, the coins she had tossed in for luck, but when she opened them, the fountain did not appear. The streets themselves warped around her perception. Houses that should have been across the street loomed beside her, impossibly tall and narrow, while familiar shops shifted in subtle ways, brick facades missing, signs flickering, the windows either dark or glowing faintly with unidentifiable light. She approached the old bakery she had loved, her stomach twisting with a mixture of hunger and unease. The bell above the door jingled faintly as she pushed it open, but the interior was empty, shelves bare. Yet, for an instant, she thought she heard the smell of fresh bread, warm and sweet, filling the air. She spun around, half expecting to see her childhood friend at the counter, but there was nothing. Only shadows dancing in the corners, teasing her, pulling at the edges of her memory. Claire's phone buzzed, an alert, a message, but when she unlocked it, there was nothing there. No calls, no texts, no navigation signal. Even GPS had vanished, her phone displaying a blank gray map with no roads, no towns, only an unbroken void stretching in all directions. Panic clawed at her chest. She had to know what had happened. She had to find someone, anyone, who could confirm that this place had existed. She wandered down what should have been familiar streets, calling names she remembered, friends, neighbors, teachers, but no one answered. The voices she had once known were gone, swallowed by silence that pressed in from every direction. As night deepened, faint lights flickered in the distance. Windows glimmered faintly in abandoned houses, and doors stood slightly ajar, moving as if inviting her inside. She approached her childhood home, the little white house with the blue shutters that had been the center of her world. The front yard was overgrown, the garden untended, weeds climbing over the stone path she had once loved. She reached out to touch the gate, and her hand passed through it. Not solid. Not real. Her stomach dropped. Her home, the place she had spent countless hours of her life, existed only in memory, only as a ghostly echo. She staggered back, clutching her chest. The village seemed to respond to her panic. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, twisting along the sides of buildings. Whispers rose in the air, overlapping, almost like voices speaking just beyond comprehension. She could hear fragments. Who are you? You don't belong. It's always been this way. Her heart pounded as though it were trying to escape her chest. Every instinct screamed to run, to leave, but she could not. Something invisible pulled her deeper into the streets, guiding her toward the center, toward the heart of a place that might never have truly existed. A figure appeared at the end of the street, barely visible, blurred as though seen through frosted glass. Claire froze. It was a man, or had been a man, tall, his face indistinct, but his posture familiar. He raised a hand, motioning her forward, and for a brief moment, she felt a surge of hope. Perhaps she wasn't alone. Perhaps someone remembered her. She moved cautiously toward him, her footsteps echoing unnaturally on the cobblestones. But as she drew closer, the figure changed. His body shimmered, flickering between multiple forms, first a neighbor from her childhood, then a teacher she had adored, then a stranger whose face she almost recognized but couldn't place. With every step, he became less and less solid, until he dissolved entirely, leaving only a faint shimmer in the night air. Claire's throat tightened. She sank to her knees, realizing with a cold dread that no one remembered her. No one had ever remembered her. She was alone in a village that existed only when she looked at it, and perhaps only in the fragments her mind could conjure. She wandered aimlessly, following the faint glow of lanterns that appeared only to vanish moments later. In what should have been the schoolyard, the swing sets moved on their own, creaking in the wind. The playground, once vibrant with laughter, was now a ghostly replay, shadows moving without bodies, echoing the life she thought she had lived. And in the corner, faintly, she saw a single figure standing perfectly still. A child? Her younger self? She blinked, and it was gone. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes, time had no meaning here. The village stretched infinitely, morphing around her, folding streets over streets, layering memories over reality. She could see herself running down alleys she had never taken, hear herself laughing in rooms she had never entered. Every step forward seemed to pull her deeper into the labyrinth of her own recollections. Each landmark she sought either disappeared or transformed before her eyes. She realized with a shiver that the closer she looked, the more the village resisted her, as though testing her, shaping her perception to decide whether she could withstand the truth. Claire's final desperate hope led her to the old church at the edge of town. Its steeple reached into the night, glowing faintly in a light that came from nowhere. She reached the heavy oak doors and pushed, but they did not budge. Her reflection in the brass handle twisted, showing her face aged, haggard, almost unrecognizable. Whispers rose again, louder this time. "You were never here. You cannot leave." She fell back, heart racing, and for the first time, a cold certainty sank into her bones. This town, her life, her past, it might have all been fabricated. And as the first faint glow of dawn threatened the horizon, the village began to fade again, outlines melting into mist. She could no longer discern roads from fields, buildings from shadows. The world she had known all her life existed only for a fleeting moment at night, and now that light was vanishing, leaving her utterly alone in the silence. Claire's hands shook as she clutched her head, tears running freely. She had arrived seeking answers, but the village had only shown her questions, each one darker and more impossible than the last. And somewhere deep in her chest, a quiet, insidious fear whispered, the village hadn't just forgotten her, it might never have existed at all. Claire explores the village, finding her hometown warped, abandoned, and unrecognizable. The people and places she remembers flicker like ghosts, and she realizes the town may only exist for her memory. As dusk settled over the horizon, Claire continued her tentative exploration, the village stretching endlessly in shadows and half-formed structures. The air grew cooler, carrying an unsettling stillness, like a held breath waiting for something terrible to be revealed. She rounded a corner and froze. Figures emerged from the fog that had begun to creep along the cobblestones, residents, or what should have been residents, moving slowly and deliberately. They were dressed in the familiar clothes of her childhood memories, the grocer in his faded apron, the teacher with her worn scarf, children racing down the street with kites that fluttered impossibly in the non-existent wind. For a split second, Claire's chest surged with relief. Maybe someone remembered her. Maybe her memories weren't lies. But as she stepped forward and called out their names, the relief twisted into fear. The figures paused, their heads tilting slightly, eyes narrowing, not in recognition, but confusion, suspicion, as if she were a stranger who had stumbled into the wrong scene. The grocer blinked, then shook his head. "I don't know you," he said, voice calm but empty, almost rehearsed, like a line he had spoken 1,000 times. The teacher mirrored him. "No. I don't remember you." The children stopped their play, staring at her with vacant eyes, their mouths opening as if to speak, but no sound emerged. Each step she took toward them only seemed to deepen their indifference, their faces flickering between clarity and a haze of distortion, until the familiarity she had relied upon twisted into something alien. Claire's pulse raced, her mind struggling to reconcile this. "This isn't possible," she whispered to herself. You have to remember me." But they did not, or they could not. Every interaction felt like a cruel joke, each familiar face a mask that refused to reveal the person beneath. She reached out to touch the arm of the grocer, and it passed through him like mist, leaving her hand cold and shaking. Panic surged, choking her as the realization set in. She had no one to anchor her here, no proof that this village had ever existed outside her mind. The streets twisted as she walked, bending in ways that defied geometry. Houses that had once stood solid now melted into one another, staircases leading to nowhere, doors opening into walls. A faint whisper drifted from the alley to her left, drawing her toward a small, flickering light. Hesitant but desperate for any clue, Claire followed it and found an old man sitting on a bench, hunched over a cane. His eyes glimmered with something she could not identify. Recognition? Memory? Or merely reflection of her own desperate hope? She approached cautiously. "Excuse me, do you know me? I grew up here." Her voice trailed off as the man raised his hand, motioning for silence. "You don't belong here," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made her stomach drop. "No one belongs here. You never really were part of this town, and yet, somehow, you remember." His eyes glinted with a strange knowledge, distant yet piercing. Memory is dangerous. It creates ghosts, and ghosts, they linger. Claire shook her head, trying to force herself to understand. "What do you mean?" "I lived here. I went to school here. I have pictures, names, stories, everything." But as she spoke, the memories themselves wavered, flickering in her mind like a broken film reel. The details she had clung to so tightly, the smell of her mother's kitchen, the pattern of the brick path, the sound of church bells, began to distort, the edges of her recollection twisting and dissolving. "It's real," she said again, almost pleading. "It has to be real." The old man sighed, leaning back on his cane. "The village is a cage, but not the one you think. It only exists when someone remembers it. And sometimes, those memories are the only thing holding the town together. But the moment belief falters, the streets crumble, the people vanish, and you realize, it was never what you thought." He looked past her, his gaze sweeping the flickering houses. "You are not alone, though. Many have come before you, searching for what cannot be found. You will see them, hear them, but they are echoes, shadows of lives that were never truly lived." Claire's chest tightened. The weight of his words pressed down on her like the night itself. "Echoes? Shadows? What are you saying? That I never existed here?" Her hands trembled as tears pricked at her eyes. The fog thickened, curling around the street lamps, around the benches, around her very feet. The village seemed to pulse with a heartbeat she could feel in her bones, a rhythm that was not natural, not of this world. Then movement, subtle, almost imperceptible, rippling through the street. She caught glimpses of figures just beyond her peripheral vision, people walking, running, bending, gesturing, but when she turned, the streets were empty. Windows flickered with lights that disappeared when she approached. A child's laughter rang out, piercing the still night, but no child appeared. It was as though the town itself were alive, shifting, reshaping itself around her presence, responding to her panic, her need to see it, her refusal to accept its impossibility. She stumbled toward what should have been the town hall, hoping for some record, some evidence, something concrete. The building loomed in the mist, its outline wavering, walls dissolving into air and light. She pushed open the doors, but inside was only darkness, yet in that darkness, shadows moved. They whispered her name, fragments of sentences: remember, forget, belong. Her heart raced as a flicker of movement caught her eye. A group of villagers appeared, circling her, their faces blank, shifting constantly, morphing from one familiar face to another. She screamed, stepping back, but the floor beneath her feet seemed to ripple like water. "You are here, but not here," a chorus of voices whispered, overlapping, indistinguishable. "This is not yours. This place is not yours. You will not leave." The realization hit Claire with bone-deep cold. She had never truly belonged here. And yet, the village existed because of her memories. Every flicker of light, every shadow, every whispered name was tied to her. If she let doubt take hold, the streets would vanish, the people would disappear, and she would be left alone in nothingness. And she understood, with a chilling clarity, that someone, or something, was watching, waiting for her to falter. She stumbled back into the fog, the village shifting violently around her, the echoes of people she had once known stretching into impossible forms. Every familiar landmark, every fragment of memory she had clung to, was bending, melting, reshaping. And as the night deepened, Claire realized with a sinking dread that the village was testing her, pushing her toward the edge of sanity, and that the night itself might be her only friend, or her only prison. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire felt the air change, thickening with an almost tangible weight. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the cobblestones, elongating like reaching fingers, brushing her as she walked. The village, which had seemed empty and unreal in daylight, began to awaken in ways that were both mesmerizing and horrifying. Faint glimmers of light appeared in windows, soft and golden, casting distorted reflections on the ground. Doors that had seemed solid in the day now hung ajar, creaking on invisible hinges, revealing interiors that shimmered and dissolved at the edges, like watercolors bleeding into darkness. Every step Claire took, the streets shifted subtly, alleys stretched farther, corners twisted in impossible angles, and familiar houses appeared in places she didn't remember. The first figures appeared as she reached the old schoolyard. Shadows of children darted across the empty playground, their movements jerky, almost mechanical, and yet unnervingly familiar. Claire's heart ached with recognition. She thought she could see herself among them, running, laughing, small hands brushing over the metal slide. But the moment she tried to approach, the figure dissipated like smoke, leaving nothing but the cold wind and the distant hum of the unseen village. She stumbled backward, gripping the fence, realizing that the village only became tangible at night, and even then, it was only ever half-formed, like a dream she could almost touch but never fully hold. Lanterns flickered along the streets, casting pools of amber light that barely penetrated the growing fog. In the distance, the church steeple shone faintly, as if guiding her. She walked toward it, each step echoing unnaturally, the sound bouncing off invisible walls. The streets themselves seemed to breathe, the fog curling and twisting like living tendrils, brushing against her skin with a chilling touch. Her footsteps led her past houses she thought she knew, her childhood home, the bakery, the little toy store, but each one wavered, shimmering at the edges, details morphing as she blinked. Windows flashed glimpses of her past, her mother baking bread, her father tending the garden, her friends playing hide and seek. But every image was fleeting, as if the town were showing her fragments of memory, teasing her with pieces she could not grasp. The church doors loomed ahead, enormous and impossibly tall. She reached out to touch the wooden surface, and the texture shifted beneath her fingers, smooth then rough, warm then cold, like a living thing responding to her hesitation. She pushed them open, and the interior was both familiar and impossible. Stained glass windows glowed faintly, but the figures within them moved, gesturing toward her, their faces flickering between saints and people she had known, teachers, neighbors, friends she had believed were real. The pews stretched into infinity, folding over themselves, forming impossible angles that made her stomach lurch. A soft hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to originate both inside her and from the walls themselves, vibrating through her chest, reminding her that she was no longer merely an observer. She was part of the village's pulse, a living conduit for its existence. As she moved deeper into the nave, she noticed movement along the shadows, figures stepping from darkness into faint light, watching her silently. They were the villagers she had tried to find during the day, but at night, they were different. They were neither alive nor dead, faces perfectly still yet vaguely shifting, expressions alternating between recognition and blankness. Claire tried to speak, asking if they remembered her, if they knew what had happened, but no sound emerged from their mouths. The only communication came from the air itself, whispering fragments of sentences she couldn't fully comprehend. It was never yours. You cannot leave. Remember or be lost. Her hands shook as she turned, and in that moment, she glimpsed the edge of the town, where darkness thickened into something almost solid. Shadows moved there with purpose, forming shapes she could not define. She thought she saw her younger self running toward her, but every time she reached out, the figure dissolved, replaced by a void that seemed to stretch on endlessly. Claire's breath came in shallow gasps. The village was alive at night, and it was aware of her. Every flicker of memory, every glance, every heartbeat she took seemed to feed it, as though her recollection alone kept the streets from collapsing entirely into nothingness. A sudden chill ran down her spine as she noticed a door she had never seen before, tucked between two impossibly close buildings. It was a small wooden door, plain and unmarked, radiating an unsettling warmth. Against every instinct, she approached it. The air around her thickened, and the whispers grew louder, overlapping into an unintelligible chorus. She reached for the handle, and as her fingers touched the cold metal, the door swung open on its own, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Claire hesitated, staring into the void. Something inside told her this was where she would find the truth, or lose herself entirely. Compelled by a mix of dread and curiosity, she stepped inside. The stairs seemed to stretch infinitely downward, the light from above fading until she was swallowed by darkness. Whispers followed her, closer now, echoing inside her skull, urging her onward, warning her, questioning her. Each step felt heavier, as though gravity itself were bending against her, slowing her descent, testing her resolve. Shadows clung to the walls, twisting into faces she recognized, faces she wished she didn't. Memories bled into reality, impossible events overlapping real ones, until she could no longer tell where her past ended and the village began. At the bottom of the stairs, she entered a room that seemed to exist out of time itself. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting her in slightly different ways, younger, older, happier, terrified, and even faces she didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar. In the center of the room stood a single chair, empty, facing the largest mirror. As she stepped closer, the reflection rippled like water, and a voice whispered directly into her mind, "You belong here." And yet, you never did. Claire stumbled back, the words slicing into her chest. The village, she realized with a sinking horror, wasn't just a place, it was alive, feeding on her memories, shaping itself to her perception, testing her sanity. At night, it revealed its true form, showing her glimpses of its endless corridors, its infinite echoes, and the fragments of life it had stolen, or fabricated, for her. She understood that the village was both everywhere and nowhere, a living nightmare that existed because she remembered it, and would cease to exist if she ever forgot, or failed to recognize the truth. The hum of the village grew louder, a chorus of whispers forming into words she could barely understand. Stay, remember, do not leave, or be lost. Claire pressed her hands to her ears, but the sound penetrated her skull. The night had revealed the village, but also trapped her within it. There was no turning back, no waking to a normal day. Each shadow, each whisper, each flicker of light was a reminder that her home, her childhood, her life, was slipping through her fingers, leaving only questions, and the terrifying realization that the village might never let her go. By the dim glow of the street lamps that flickered like fragile fireflies, Claire stumbled toward what she believed had once been the town's library. During the day, it had appeared as a crumbling structure, barely recognizable behind overgrown hedges and a sagging roof, but at night, it shimmered into something closer to memory. Windows glowed faintly, and the double doors, once warped with age, now swung open with a creak that echoed through the empty streets. She hesitated at the threshold, heart hammering. Every step forward was a step into uncertainty, but she needed answers. Somewhere within the town's records or forgotten ledgers, some evidence had to remain, something to anchor her reality against the overwhelming illusion that had swallowed her home. Inside, the library was impossibly vast, stretching far beyond the building's exterior. Shelves towered overhead, bending and shifting as if alive, laden with books whose spines glimmered faintly in the shadows. Dust floated like tiny stars in the air, disturbed only by the movement of her hands as she ran them along the shelves. Titles appeared and disappeared, often changing when she looked directly at them, reflecting memories she had of her childhood that didn't match the present. One book, Chronicles of Hallbrook, bore the name of her hometown, but as she opened it, the pages were blank, except for occasional scribbles of dates, names, and events that twisted unnaturally before her eyes, shifting into versions she didn't remember, yet felt eerily familiar. Claire knelt to examine a rolled map tucked into a shelf corner. She unrolled it, expecting streets she recognized from her own recollections. Instead, the map was a fragmented labyrinth, roads starting and stopping without reason, entire neighborhoods missing or folded over themselves in ways that defied logic. The markers that should have indicated her home, the school, the bakery, were all absent, replaced with strange symbols she could not decipher. Her fingers traced the lines frantically, desperation growing. "It has to be here," she whispered. "Somewhere." But the map shifted beneath her hands, roads bending and twisting like they were alive, reshaping themselves in response to her fear, mocking her. A stack of ledgers nearby caught her attention. Dust-covered and heavy, they seemed like they might hold answers. She flipped through them, scanning the names and dates. There were births, deaths, marriages, but every record involving her family had been erased. The pages that should have marked her childhood milestones were blank, the ink smudged, as if reality itself had rejected their existence. Claire's hands trembled violently. Even official records, the supposed proof of her life here, were gone. And yet, every memory she had, the scent of her mother's kitchen, the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings, the faces of neighbors who had loved her, insisted on being real. Her mind began to fracture under the impossible dissonance. If the documents didn't exist, how could she trust her own memories? As she pored over the ledgers, faint movements at the edges of the library caught her attention. Shadows slipped between shelves, almost human but always just out of focus. They mirrored the villagers she had seen outside, faceless figures, shifting forms that seemed aware of her presence. One leaned closer, a whisper brushing the back of her mind, "You are remembering too much, they cannot allow it." Claire spun around, but the aisles were empty. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of old paper, dust, and something she couldn't name, a metallic tang that made her stomach churn. Every instinct screamed that she was being watched, that the library itself was alive, a sentinel guarding truths too dangerous to reveal easily. On a higher shelf, she discovered a small, locked box, the wood darkened with age. Something about it called to her, a faint warmth emanating from within. She pried it open with shaking hands, revealing a bundle of photographs, black and white images, each depicting the town she remembered, perfectly preserved in time. There was her mother standing in the doorway of their house, the bakery sign overhead, children playing in the streets. But as she flipped through the photos, subtle inconsistencies began to emerge, shadows where none should be, figures she didn't recognize peeking from windows, and in the background of one, the faint outline of her own reflection, but distorted, elongated, unnatural. The photographs were proof of a town that may have existed, but not exactly as she remembered it. A sudden gust of wind rattled the doors, and the whispers rose again, louder, overlapping, urgent. Claire stumbled backward, clutching the photos. She realized with chilling clarity that the village was not only observing her but shaping what she could perceive. The maps, the ledgers, the photographs, they were all fragments, hints, tools designed to test her memory, to measure her belief in a reality that might have been nothing more than a fabrication. Every document was alive in its own way, bending and shifting to ensure that she remained both curious and trapped, searching endlessly for confirmation that might never come. Claire sank to the floor, the photographs scattered around her. Her hands shook as she tried to reconcile the evidence with the memories that insisted on being real. Names she remembered from school were absent from the ledgers, streets she walked every day were missing from the maps, and yet the village persisted in the night, shimmering and morphing like a living organism, reacting to her doubt, feeding on her confusion. She felt a creeping terror settle in her bones. The village was both real and unreal, a place that existed solely through her perception, waiting for her to unravel under the weight of its contradictions. And then, as she sat in the dim glow of the lanterns, the photographs began to move. Faces shifted, eyes following her every motion, mouths opening to whisper fragments she could not decipher. She flinched, dropping the papers, her mind teetering on the edge of panic. The village had revealed a truth she could not yet understand. The town's existence depended on her memory, yet its full reality was deliberately obscured. Somewhere within these shifting documents, these flickering lights, these whispered shadows, was the answer she sought. But to find it, she would have to confront the impossible, the horrifying, the truth of her own manufactured past. The library seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the building itself knew she had reached a turning point. The night outside deepened, the streets stretching endlessly in all directions, the lanterns flickering with a life of their own. Claire rose to her feet, her resolve hardening. If she was to understand the village, if she was to find the truth of her own existence, she would need to follow every clue, push past the fear, and confront whatever waited at the heart of this nightmarish place. And somewhere, deep in her chest, she felt the unmistakable pull of destiny, or perhaps of design, guiding her toward the answers that could either free her, or trap her forever. The deeper Claire ventured into the twisting streets of her hometown, the heavier the air became, as though the fog itself weighed down on her shoulders, pressing into her chest and throat. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching along the cracked sidewalks, crawling over the facades of houses that had once been familiar but now wavered like reflections in a disturbed pond. Each step she took made her acutely aware of something, or someone, watching. At first, she thought it was her imagination, the anxiety of realizing that her life's memories might not belong to reality. But then she noticed it, figures slipping along the edges of the streets, hidden partially behind buildings, vanishing whenever she turned her head to confront them directly. They were subtle at first. A shadow lingering near the bakery, too tall and still to belong to a child. A flicker of movement at the corner of her eye, suggesting a person who wasn't there when she looked. She began to sense a rhythm to their appearances, a pattern that seemed deliberate. The village itself, it seemed, had observers, hidden figures, neither fully human nor entirely incorporeal, moving with a precision that unnerved her. Their presence was never announced, yet it was undeniable. They were everywhere, slipping between the folds of the streets, the alleyways, and the dimly lit doorways. Claire's pulse quickened as she tried to approach one, her instincts screaming at her to flee, yet a force, something inexplicable, pulled her forward. She reached for a shadow near the church steps, and her hand passed through it, solid one moment, gone the next. The air rippled, distorted, and she felt a pressure at the back of her mind, like a whisper that wasn't quite a sound. Observe, remember, do not forget, it seemed to say, though no voice came from her ears. She spun around, heart hammering, but the streets behind her were empty, except for the subtle tremble of light along the edges of the houses. These hidden figures were not just present, they were aware. They knew she was there, testing her, measuring her every movement. The shadows multiplied as night deepened, moving in patterns that defied logic. They weren't ordinary specters, some were tall and humanoid, others stretched in impossible angles, thin as blades or wide as walls. Occasionally, one would pause in her path, coalescing just long enough for her to glimpse a face, or something that resembled a face, but every time she tried to focus, it dissolved into the surrounding darkness, leaving only an impression of eyes that watched, of intent that unnerved her. The villagers she had seen before, the ones who didn't remember her, remained stationary, blank faces blending into the scenery, while these hidden figures shifted, dynamic and deliberate, like conductors orchestrating the town's eerie performance. Claire's mind raced. She remembered the maps and ledgers she had found in the library, the photographs that twisted and changed under her gaze. Could these figures be responsible? Were they the architects of her distorted reality, bending her memories to create the village she thought she knew? Fear coiled in her stomach. She realized that this place wasn't just a passive reflection of her mind, it was actively responding to her presence. Every whisper, every flicker of light, every shadow that stretched and twisted along the streets was evidence that she was being watched, analyzed, even manipulated. As she walked deeper into the town, the figures became bolder. One lingered near the steps of what had once been the town hall, its form tall and rigid, the outline of its head tilting slightly as though studying her. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She tried to call out, to demand answers, but the words stuck in her mouth, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the village. Slowly, the figure moved closer, gliding rather than walking, its edges shimmering like a mirage. The air around it seemed colder, denser, pressing against her skin, filling her with a sense of dread she couldn't shake. Suddenly, she heard a voice, soft, distant, almost drowned in the hum of the village, but it carried weight, authority, a resonance that made her knees weak. "You were not meant to return," it said. Claire spun, but no one was there. The shadows, the hidden figures, all shifted imperceptibly, reorganizing themselves in response to her panic. She stumbled backward, clutching her chest, realizing that the village itself was alive in a way she had not fully understood. It didn't just react to her memories, it anticipated them, guided them, controlled them. She tried to focus on familiar landmarks, anything that could anchor her, but the streets twisted and stretched like rubber, houses sliding imperceptibly to new positions. The hidden figures followed her in silent procession, always just at the periphery of her vision, unseen by anyone else, yet undeniably real. A feeling of inevitability pressed down on her, she could not escape these watchers. They were tied to the village, and she was now inseparably bound to both. Every step forward risked revealing more, every glance into a shadowed alley could expose truths she was not ready to see. Her fear gave way to determination. If she was to understand the village, and perhaps to reclaim a fragment of her past, she had to confront these figures, to see what they were, to find their purpose. She walked toward the largest shadow, one that had lingered near the edge of the churchyard, its edges dark and defined, yet pulsating with an almost human rhythm. As she approached, the shape shifted again, elongating, spreading like smoke, and then solidifying into a tall figure draped in the semblance of clothing she recognized from her childhood memories. The face remained obscured, hidden behind an ever-changing mask of shadow, yet the figure exuded a deliberate intelligence, an awareness that sent icy fingers through her spine. "You see them now," the distant chorus of whispers said, overlapping in dissonant harmony. "You cannot ignore what watches, for it is as old as your memory, as persistent as your fear." Claire swallowed, nodding, though the words were directed at no one in particular. The figures around her shifted closer, the streetlights flickering in response, shadows intertwining with shadows, until she could barely distinguish reality from illusion. And in the corner of her eye, she glimpsed movement that made her stomach clench, a figure that resembled herself, younger, watching silently, mimicking her movements with unnerving precision. Claire realized with a cold certainty that the village had been orchestrated for her, not merely to trap her, but to shape her understanding, to guide her toward revelations she might not yet be ready to accept. The hidden figures were both guardians and interrogators, observing her, probing her sanity, ensuring she would follow the threads of memory that led to the town's darkest secrets. Panic, dread, and curiosity intertwined within her, a cocktail of fear that pushed her onward, deeper into the shifting streets. Somewhere in the heart of this manipulated reality lay the answers she sought. And yet, with each step, the watchers reminded her that she was not free, that the village's pulse, its breath, its shadowed inhabitants, would not allow her escape without understanding the cost. Night deepened over the village, pressing down with a heavy silence that was broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and the whispering of shadows that seemed to move independently of the wind. Claire's legs ached from hours of wandering, yet some invisible force propelled her onward, drawing her toward the center of the town where the old clock tower should have stood. Instead, she found a vast open square she had no memory of, paved with blackened cobblestones that gleamed faintly beneath the dim lamplight. As she stepped into the square, the air thickened, and the familiar yet uncanny sensation that the village itself was aware of her intensified. She was being watched, guided, and tested, all at once. A sudden movement drew her attention. figures materialized in the square, glowing faintly with an ethereal light. At first, she thought they were villagers, but as they moved, she realized they were representations of her past, ghostly reenactments of moments she remembered, distorted yet undeniable. She saw her younger self playing in the streets, chasing her friends, laughing freely, only to have the scene shift mid-motion into something darker, the children's faces twisting into unfamiliar, hollow expressions, laughter turning into whispered cries. Her chest tightened as she realized that these were not merely memories, they were recreations, staged nightly by the village itself, intended to force her to confront what she had buried or perhaps fabricated in her mind. She watched as a scene unfolded near the fountain that existed only in her memory. A younger version of her mother appeared, baking bread in a sunlit kitchen, humming a tune Claire thought she had long forgotten. But the scene shimmered and twisted, the mother's face blurred, her hands elongated unnaturally, and the bread crumbled into dust midair. Claire stepped closer, wanting to reach out, but invisible forces pushed her back, an unseen hand pressing against her chest, urging caution. The village, she realized, was dictating how much she could see, controlling the clarity of her memories, teasing her with fragments while withholding the full truth. More figures appeared, representing moments she had long believed were private, forgotten, or meaningless. Her first day at school, the day she had fallen from a tree, the laughter and scolding of her neighbors, all of it replayed before her, yet subtly altered. Friends' faces shifted in impossible ways, events occurred slightly differently than she remembered, whispers echoed from unseen mouths, "Do you remember? Or do you lie to yourself?" The village was forcing her to question everything, testing the reliability of her own mind. Every shadowed corner, every flicker of light, every echo in the square seemed designed to destabilize her, to make her doubt the authenticity of her own memories. Claire's breathing became rapid, her mind straining to hold together the fragments of her identity. One scene in particular froze her in place, a night in her childhood home, her father reading by the fireplace, a photograph of her as a baby on the mantel. The image began to ripple, the photograph stretching and twisting until it revealed something impossible, a figure standing behind her father, faceless, watching her. She turned, but the room around her was gone, replaced by mist and cobblestones. The faceless watcher had vanished, yet the impression of its presence lingered, searing into her consciousness. Every nightly reenactment was not just a memory, it was a warning, a test, a demonstration of the village's reach into her mind. Desperate for understanding, Claire began following the sequences of these reenactments, tracing the flickering figures as they moved through streets she remembered and alleys she didn't. Some moments repeated, looping endlessly, while others diverged into new, impossible realities. She realized that the village was not static, it was living, breathing, and infinitely malleable, reshaping itself around her perception. The more she observed, the more it seemed to respond, altering details to guide her attention, to show her truths she wasn't yet ready to comprehend. She began to suspect that the village was teaching her something, though what and why remained elusive. In the center of the square, a massive mirror suddenly materialized, reflecting not just Claire, but the entirety of the nightly reenactment around her. The reflections were alive, shifting, overlapping, creating an endless cascade of herself and others, all moving in time with scenes she remembered and ones she had never lived. In the mirror, she could see the hidden figures from before, their outlines faint, observing her, nodding almost imperceptibly, guiding her attention towards certain scenes. She understood then that the village's reality was layered, her memories formed the base, but the hidden figures curated and manipulated them, shaping her perception to reveal or conceal truths, testing her awareness, her courage, and her sanity. A soft, insistent whisper broke through the hum of the square, "Look closer. Remember or be lost." Claire stepped forward, drawn toward the mirror despite the chill of fear gripping her. In the reflections, she saw a scene she had never consciously remembered, a woman resembling her, standing alone in the square, staring into the same mirror, shadows flickering at the edges. The reflection's eyes locked with hers, conveying terror and recognition simultaneously. Claire gasped, stepping back, realizing that the village had been orchestrating these reenactments for decades, preparing anyone who returned to face the truth of the town's existence, and perhaps, the fabricated nature of their own lives. The shadows around her seemed to pulse in response, elongating, writhing, forming shapes that resembled her own movements, mirroring her every decision with unnatural precision. She understood, with a cold certainty, that she was both observer and participant. The village fed on her memories, shaping itself around her, and in turn, she had become a part of it, trapped in a perpetual loop of observation and reaction. The nightly reenactments were not merely displays, they were lessons, warnings, and snares, all designed to ensure that she would confront her own reality and the unreality of the world she had always known. Claire's hands shook as she reached toward the mirror, and as her fingers brushed the reflective surface, the world around her rippled violently. Shadows twisted into new forms, and the whispers rose into a chorus of overlapping voices, almost intelligible, repeating fragments: remember, observe, belong, or vanish. The village pulsed with awareness, alive in a way that transcended space and time, and Claire understood with bone-deep dread that she was caught at the heart of something ancient, something that had existed long before she had walked these streets, long before she had believed in the reality of her hometown. Her chest heaved, and for a moment, she felt herself teetering on the edge of madness. But alongside the fear was a spark of determination, a need to see the truth, to understand the hidden structure of the village, to reclaim the fragments of her past that were slipping through her fingers. If the nightly reenactments were a test, then she would endure. She would observe, follow, and unravel the threads until she discovered the purpose behind the village, the hidden figures, and the manipulations of memory that bound her so completely. Somewhere in the distorted, flickering streets, the answers awaited, and she would confront them, no matter the cost. As the village throbbed with unseen life, Claire's mind raced with the fragments of memories and reenactments she had witnessed. The nightly sequences had revealed more than distorted recollections, they hinted at a structure, a hidden logic underlying the town's impossible existence. The whispers that followed her along the shifting streets carried fragments of guidance, urging her toward the oldest part of the village, a place she had never consciously remembered, a circular square encircled with towering, ancient buildings whose facades shimmered between stone and shadow. Locals, when visible, avoided the area, and even the hidden figures seemed hesitant here, slipping silently into the fog rather than approaching. Claire knew instinctively that answers awaited within this eerie quarter, a place that seemed older than time itself. A narrow passage between two massive stone buildings led her deeper into the heart of the district. The air here was thicker, almost tangible, tinged with the metallic scent of age and decay, interwoven with the faint aroma of ink and paper, as if countless secrets had been trapped and preserved in the walls themselves. Cobblestones underfoot were uneven, worn smooth by centuries of unseen footsteps, and shadows clung unnaturally to the edges of the buildings, twisting when she glanced at them directly. She felt the pull of anticipation and dread, like the pressure of gravity pressing against her chest, urging her onward yet warning of danger. At the center of the quarter stood a massive building that resembled a council hall, its doors towering and carved with symbols that shimmered faintly in the lamplight. This was the Elders' Hall, a place she had only heard whispers of as a child, fragments of stories told in hushed tones by neighbors and passing travelers. The tales had always seemed fanciful, a myth born from small-town superstition, but now, standing before it, Claire could feel its power, its history, radiating through the very cobblestones. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doors, which opened before she even touched them, revealing an interior cloaked in shadows yet brimming with strange, pulsing light. Inside, the hall stretched impossibly high, the ceiling vanishing into darkness, while staircases spiraled upward and downward in ways that defied geometry. Figures moved silently along the periphery, hidden but observant. At the center, a circular dais rose from the floor, lined with seats occupied by shadowed forms that radiated authority. Their faces were obscured, yet there was a sense of recognition when Claire stepped forward, as if they had been expecting her. These were the elders, the architects of the village, beings that had orchestrated the manipulations she had encountered. She felt an overwhelming mixture of fear and curiosity. Was this a court, a council, or a prison? One figure stepped forward, the air shimmering around it. Its face was partially revealed, aged but unearthly, a combination of features she recognized from people in her life and features entirely alien. "You've come far," the figure intoned, voice echoing as if vibrating within her bones. Few who return remember enough to reach this place. Claire's chest tightened. What are you? Why is my town gone? Why is it like this? Her voice cracked under the weight of fear and exhaustion. The elder moved closer, shadows curling around its form like a cloak. This village has existed long before your birth, and yet, it exists because of you. It is a place of memory, a crucible of recollection. Each visitor brings their mind, and in doing so, sustains this place. You have returned because your memories remain strong enough, vivid enough, to awaken it. Claire's stomach churned. Awaken? You mean? I didn't, it wasn't real. The elder shook its head slowly. Reality is not as fixed as you believe. We do not lie to you, but neither do we reveal everything. The village is a test, a balance between memory and belief, between fear and comprehension. Those who cannot sustain the weight of their own recollection vanish. Those who endure learn truths about themselves, and the village, that cannot be learned elsewhere. Its shadowed hand gestured to the periphery of the hall, where hidden figures waited silently, their forms flickering like flames. These are the watchers, the keepers of history and perception. They ensure that every step, every decision, every memory is observed, catalogued, and preserved. They are both guardians and guides. Claire's mind spun. Every twisted street, every shifting house, every nightly reenactment now made sense, but the clarity was terrifying. So, all of this, the memories, the shadows, the village itself, it was made to test me, she whispered, feeling her pulse racing. The elder inclined its head. Not to punish, but to reveal. To show you the fragility of memory, and the resilience of perception. You think your life is yours, but here, you see that the boundaries between past and present, reality and imagination, are porous. The village reveals the truth that hides in plain sight. She swallowed hard. And, what happens if I fail? If I can't? The elder's expression remained unreadable, yet its presence seemed to fill the hall with a silent weight. Those who fail are lost to time, to memory, to themselves. The village endures, but they do not. The unseen watchers, the nightly reenactments, the shifting streets, they are all instruments to prevent that outcome, to guide those who remain aware to the center, where understanding awaits. You have endured this far. But there are further truths that will test you more severely than you can yet imagine. A low hum filled the hall as shadows slithered along the walls, twisting into abstract shapes and fleeting images of her past. Claire realized the enormity of what she faced, her life, her memories, her very identity were under examination. And at the center of it all were these elders, timeless, enigmatic, holding the keys to knowledge she both craved and feared. Every choice she had made since returning, every hesitation, every instinct, had been measured, catalogued, and weighed. She felt a combination of awe and terror, a sensation that the village itself pulsed in rhythm with her own heartbeat, that she was no longer merely a visitor, but a participant in something ancient, vast, and impossibly complex. The elder extended a hand, almost imperceptibly. Come closer. See what has been hidden. Learn what must be remembered. And understand that the village is patient, eternal, and unforgiving. To know it fully is to confront your own soul. Claire took a trembling step forward, drawn by fear and curiosity alike. She understood that beyond this moment lay revelations that could shatter her mind, or complete her understanding of everything she had once believed. The night was far from over, and the village, alive in every shadow, every whisper, and every flicker of light, awaited the next move in its endless, haunting game. Claire followed the elder's gesture, stepping cautiously toward the center of the vast hall, where a large, ornate mirror stood on a pedestal. Its frame was carved with intricate symbols that seemed to writhe subtly when observed out of the corner of her eye, as if the wood itself were alive. The surface of the mirror shimmered, not with her reflection, but with shadows, shifting images, and flickering lights, a chaos of memories and visions she could scarcely comprehend. The air around it vibrated with an energy that made her skin tingle, a force both alluring and terrifying. She realized instinctively that this was the mirror of truth, the culmination of all the village's tests and manipulations, and that the answers she sought, the origin of her hometown and the nature of her existence, were contained within its depths. As she gazed into the mirror, the hall seemed to dissolve. The shadows of the hidden figures slithered closer, surrounding her in a silent, patient congregation. The mirror rippled, and suddenly, she was no longer merely observing, she was inside it. The images coalesced into her past, but altered in subtle, disturbing ways. She saw her childhood home, not as she remembered it, but with extra rooms, hidden corridors, and windows that revealed rooms she had never known. She saw her parents, her friends, her neighbors, all moving in unnatural loops, performing actions that seemed rehearsed, almost like actors repeating lines from a script. And then she saw herself, small and wide-eyed, standing outside the village, a spectator to the very life she thought was her own. The visions shifted again. Claire watched the village's origin unfold, a history older than she could have imagined. The elders, shadowed yet humanoid, stood in the early streets, shaping the village through some inexplicable power. Buildings rose and fell at their command, streets curved unnaturally, and the fog itself seemed to flow like liquid between structures, carrying memories and consciousness with it. The mirror of truth revealed that the village was never simply a town, it was a living construct, fed by the recollections, beliefs, and lives of those who had once belonged there. Every memory added depth, every return reinforced its existence. In her return, the very act of remembering had awakened it fully. Claire's chest tightened as she saw herself interacting with the village in ways she had never consciously remembered. Every step she had taken since arriving had been anticipated, measured, and guided by the elders and the hidden figures. They had tested her resolve, her attention to detail, her willingness to confront the unknown, and now they were revealing why. But the revelation brought with it an overwhelming dread. She realized that her memories, even the ones she trusted most, were partially manufactured. The village had reconstructed parts of her past, filling gaps with visions it deemed necessary to sustain itself. Some people she remembered had never existed, or existed only briefly, leaving traces that had been woven into the fabric of the town to maintain the illusion of continuity. A sudden ripple across the mirror's surface drew her attention. The images shifted violently, showing flashes of herself in other realities, parallel versions of the village where she never returned, where she had forgotten it entirely, and where she existed only as a shadow within the streets. The hidden figures appeared in each scenario, sometimes guiding, sometimes observing, but always watching. Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. She was not merely part of this village, she was integral to its continued existence. If she failed, if she left or forgot, the village could dissolve, or worse, she herself could be erased from reality, leaving only a hollow, flickering memory of her presence. The elder's voice resonated through the hall, deeper than before, entwined with the murmurs of the hidden figures. The mirror does not lie. But it does not tell everything. You must discern the truth from the illusions, understand your place, and accept the consequences of remembering. Only then will you comprehend the full nature of the village in your life. Claire's hands shook as she reached toward the mirror, her fingertips brushing the surface. The moment she touched it, a shock of recognition and horror coursed through her. Images of her earliest memories merged with visions of the village's creation, blurring the line between reality and fabrication. She saw herself as a child being watched, guided, and subtly manipulated. Moments she had believed were private and spontaneous now revealed as orchestrated by forces she could not fully understand. Her mind reeled as the mirror pulled her deeper. She saw the original inhabitants of the village, people who had lived and died decades ago, their essence absorbed into the town's fabric, forming the hidden structures and shadows she had observed. Every laugh, every argument, every mundane daily action had been catalogued and preserved, woven into the streets, the houses, and even the fog. And within this intricate web, Claire saw herself repeatedly, entering, leaving, returning, remembering, forgetting, an eternal participant in a cycle designed to test awareness, memory, and the will to confront truth. A whisper, soft but insistent, brushed her mind. The village remembers. You cannot hide from it. You are both the witness and the proof. She understood then the full implication of her return. The village had existed partially in memory, waiting for someone like her to restore it, to awaken it fully. She had been chosen, or perhaps trapped, to confront the hidden architecture of existence, to reconcile her past with the living memory of a place that was never entirely real, yet never entirely unreal. With a mixture of fear and determination, Claire stepped back from the mirror, sweat slicking her palms, knees trembling. She realized that understanding the village required more than courage. It demanded acceptance of paradox, recognition of manipulation, and the willingness to face truths she might not survive mentally or emotionally. Yet the mirror of truth had offered her something invaluable: clarity. The village's existence, the elders' motives, the hidden figures, and her own memories were now partially revealed. The next step, whatever it might entail, would require her to confront these truths directly, to navigate the boundaries of perception and reality, and to determine whether she could endure what the village demanded. Claire's mind reeled as she stepped back from the mirror of truth, her reflection flickering one last time before the images dissolved into shadow. The elders' presence felt heavier now, more tangible, as if the air itself carried their judgment. She realized with bone-deep certainty that the village's web had tightened around her. Every choice she had made since returning, the streets she wandered, the alleys she avoided, the memories she clung to, had been observed, measured, and evaluated. The mirror had revealed the extent of its power. The village did not merely exist in space, it existed in her perception, in the fragile intersection of memory and belief. And now, the ultimate question loomed: to leave or to remain. She walked toward the exit of the hall, each step echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space. Outside, the village waited, streets undulating, lights flickering, the hidden figures silently observing her from every corner. The air carried a chill that penetrated her bones, yet it was not purely cold, it was heavy with expectation. Claire understood instinctively that departure would not be simple. Leaving meant confronting the village's greatest paradox. If she attempted to escape, to abandon the town, she risked erasure, losing not only the physical space but the memories that tethered her identity. Yet remaining meant surrendering fully to its control, accepting that her life, her past, and perhaps her very self would forever be entwined with a place that defied logic and sanity. She paused on the edge of the square, the hidden figures shifting subtly, as though they were weighing her resolve. Their shapes elongated and contracted in silent judgment, whispering fragments of questions that seemed to echo inside her skull. Do you belong here? Can you endure? Will you forget or remain? Claire's heart hammered, her mind spinning with the consequences. She pictured the life she had left behind, if it had ever existed, the career, the friends, the routines, and realized that even those memories were subject to the village's manipulation. To leave was to risk losing everything she had ever known. To stay was to risk losing herself entirely in the endless cycles of observation and reenactment. Her gaze returned to the mirror of truth, now reflecting the shadowed streets and the hidden figures that had stalked her journey. She saw herself in the reflection, not a single person, but multiple versions, overlapping, layered, each representing a potential choice. One Claire stepped away, toward freedom, toward the faint glow of reality beyond the village. Another Claire turned inward, following the twisted streets, embracing the secrets, uncovering every hidden truth, every layer of the village's existence. And in that reflection, she understood the ultimate paradox: no matter which choice she made, the village would claim her in some way. Even leaving might not mean escape, it could mean erasure, fading into oblivion until no trace of her remained. A soft, pervasive hum filled the square, vibrating through the cobblestones and into her chest. The elders' voices, blended into the whispers of the hidden figures, spoke simultaneously, a chorus both gentle and terrifying. The choice is yours. To remain is to understand. To leave is to vanish. Decide, and accept the consequence. Claire felt her knees buckle under the weight of the decision. Every instinct screamed to flee, to abandon this nightmare and reclaim whatever fragments of her old life might still be real. But something deeper, more primal, urged her to stay, to confront the village fully, to pierce the veil of illusion and claim the knowledge it guarded so jealously. She remembered the photographs in the library, the maps, the ledgers, the nightly reenactments. They had all been breadcrumbs, tests of her awareness and resilience. She realized that leaving now, before completing the cycle, would undo everything she had endured, severing her connection not only to the village but to herself. The mirror had shown her that the town's existence was tied to memory and observation. By leaving prematurely, she would relinquish her role as witness, her role as participant, and risk being erased entirely. And yet, the thought of staying forever, trapped within shifting streets, watched by faceless figures, manipulated at every moment, was suffocating, a slow erosion of autonomy that terrified her. Claire sank to the cobblestones, pressing her hands to her temples as the whispers swirled louder, overlapping in a cacophony of urgency and warning. She thought of her childhood, the moments that felt most real, the people she loved, the streets she had walked countless times. Were they memories, constructs, or something else entirely? The village had taught her to question, to observe, to endure, and now it demanded the ultimate act of courage, choosing her path, embracing either knowledge or oblivion. She could almost feel the hidden figures waiting for her decision, their silent scrutiny pressing against the edges of her consciousness, shaping the very air she breathed. Finally, she stood, a trembling, determined figure in the center of the square. She took a deep breath, eyes locked on the mirror of truth. Her hand hovered over its surface, feeling the pulse of energy emanating from within. She understood that departure might mean erasure, but it also offered freedom from perpetual observation, from the loops of reenactment, from the village's endless manipulations. To stay meant confronting the entirety of her existence, to endure the shifting streets, the hidden figures, and the elders' tests until she uncovered every secret, no matter how terrifying. The choice was hers, freedom or comprehension, oblivion or revelation, safety or understanding. The village seemed to hold its breath, the shadows freezing in anticipation. The cobblestones beneath her feet pulsed faintly, responding to the tension in her mind. The hidden figures leaned slightly, shapes flickering as if to emphasize the gravity of her decision. And in that charged silence, Claire felt a singular clarity. No matter the choice, her life, and her understanding of reality, would be forever changed. She had been given agency in a place designed to manipulate, to distort, to control. And in that moment, the paradox crystallized: the village existed because of her, yet she existed because of the village. Her choice would determine which truth endured. With a final, resolute breath, she raised her hand and touched the mirror of truth. The air trembled, light shimmered, and shadows twisted violently around her. In that instant, Claire's mind felt the weight of centuries, the gaze of the elders, the vigilance of the hidden figures, and the entirety of her life's memories, both real and fabricated, converging into a single, horrifying clarity. Whatever awaited her beyond this moment, freedom or eternal entrapment, oblivion or ultimate understanding, would be irrevocable. The choice had been made. Claire felt the mirror of truth pulse beneath her fingertips, a force of living energy that resonated with the rhythm of her heartbeat. The village held its breath, the streets outside frozen in unnatural stillness as if awaiting her next movement. When she pulled her hand away, the mirror rippled like water, and suddenly, the world around her warped. The cobblestones stretched into corridors of light and shadow, the buildings bending toward a central point she could not yet see. Claire realized with a shiver that she had entered the heart of the village, not a place on any map, but the nexus of its existence, the epicenter of its memory, power, and purpose. The hidden figures emerged from the periphery in greater numbers, forming a silent procession that led her forward. Some flickered in and out of visibility, others were barely perceptible, like smoke curling along the edges of her vision. Each seemed attuned to her presence, guiding her steps while remaining entirely inscrutable. The air was thick with whispers, fragments of voices that she recognized and did not recognize simultaneously, snatches of conversations from her childhood, echoes of events she never consciously experienced, and murmurs in languages she had never learned. The village itself was alive in a way that defied comprehension, a sentient organism whose breath was the fog, whose pulse was the shadows, whose heartbeat was the memory of every soul it had ever observed. Ahead, a vast expanse opened, a circular chamber that seemed impossibly large, stretching beyond the limits of perception. At its center stood an enormous tree, its trunk wider than any building she had ever seen, roots sprawling outward and disappearing into the misty edges of the chamber. Its bark shimmered like liquid silver, and the leaves glowed faintly, reflecting memories rather than light. Claire felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if the tree were the axis around which the village itself turned, the source of its power and the repository of every secret it had ever kept. Around the base of the tree, faint shapes moved, ghostly villagers, hidden figures, echoes of people and events she had witnessed in the nightly reenactments, each one a fragment of history preserved in perpetual animation. As she approached, the tree seemed to respond to her presence. The whispers coalesced into voices, coherent but layered, like multiple conversations overlapping in impossible harmony. You see the heart. You see the core. You understand the weight of memory and the price of perception. The words were not spoken aloud, yet resonated within her mind, vibrating through her skull with a power that left her breathless. Claire reached out to touch the trunk, and as her fingers brushed the shimmering surface, visions flooded her consciousness, the village's creation, the original elders shaping streets and homes, manipulating light and shadow, twisting reality to preserve memories that would otherwise be lost to time. She saw herself again, this time not as a visitor, but as a participant, a vital component of the village's existence. Every step she had taken, every memory she had recalled, every fear she had confronted, had fed the village, given it form, purpose, and continuity. The hidden figures, the nightly reenactments, the shifting streets, all were extensions of this central tree, mechanisms designed to test, refine, and maintain the balance between memory and reality. She understood then the full extent of the village's power. It was not merely a trap or a test, but a living archive, a place where time, perception, and consciousness converged. A sudden shiver ran down her spine as a figure emerged from the tree itself, a humanoid shape formed entirely of bark and shadow, with eyes that glowed like embers. It spoke without moving its mouth, the sound resonating directly in her mind. You have reached the heart. Few ever do. To comprehend the village fully is to confront every truth, every lie, every fragment of yourself that exists only because we allowed it. You may leave, but only with the knowledge you bear now, and the weight of everything you have witnessed will follow you. Or you may remain, and become one with the village, preserving its existence, guiding it, and protecting the balance between memory and oblivion. Claire staggered back, feeling the enormity of the choice. Leaving could mean freedom from perpetual observation, but the revelations she had gained might haunt or consume her. Staying would bind her to the village eternally, merging her consciousness with its living memory, surrendering autonomy but gaining complete understanding. Every instinct screamed for escape, yet something deeper, a blend of curiosity, fear, and a desire for truth, urged her forward, closer to the tree, closer to the source of all that had ensnared her. The whispers rose to a chorus, repeating fragments she had heard since her arrival. Observe. Remember. Endure. Belong. Accept. Claire realized with a jolt that these were not mere instructions, they were the very code by which the village functioned, the principles that sustained its reality. Each choice she had made, each moment of doubt or determination, had reinforced the patterns of the village. And now, at its heart, she understood that her will was both tested and required. Her comprehension would determine whether the village thrived or fractured, whether memory persisted or dissolved into nothingness. Summoning every ounce of courage, Claire placed her hands fully on the trunk of the tree. The whispers coalesced into a single, resonant tone, vibrating through her body and mind, weaving every memory she possessed into the living network of the village. She felt herself both observing and participating, a witness to history and a creator of continuity. The hidden figures gathered closer, bowing subtly, acknowledging her presence and her decision. The chamber pulsed with life, shadows and light intertwining, the roots of the tree spiraling outward, touching every street, every building, every fragment of the village. Claire understood that she was now at the center, fully integrated into the living consciousness of her hometown, both guardian and participant, fully aware of its mechanics and secrets. And yet, even in that profound union, she sensed the subtle tension that had always existed, the delicate balance between memory, perception, and reality. The village's power was absolute, but so too was its reliance on those who returned, those who remembered, those who dared to confront the truth. Claire had reached the heart of the forgotten village, and with that knowledge came both liberation and responsibility. She was no longer merely a visitor or a test subject, she was the nexus through which the village endured, and she would carry its truths, its shadows, and its memory forever. Claire's hands rested against the living trunk of the tree, her mind stretched to its limits by the immense surge of memories, truths, and half-lies that coursed through her consciousness. She had become part of the village, its rhythms and hidden mechanisms entwined with her own perception. Yet even as understanding settled like a heavy weight upon her, a deeper, more disquieting presence began to stir, something older than the elders, something that existed beyond time and memory, pulsing at the very edge of the village's reality. A low hum began beneath her feet, vibrating through the roots, the cobblestones, and her bones. It was a voice not of sound, but of being, ancient and unyielding, compelling her to look deeper, to uncover the final truth she had long suspected but dared not name. The hidden figures, normally inscrutable, shivered as if in reverence and fear simultaneously. Shadows elongated unnaturally, spiraling into forms that defied description, like fragments of lost souls condensed into motion. Claire felt the mirror of truth pulse in tandem with the tree, rippling outward until the walls of the chamber dissolved entirely. She was no longer in any physical space but suspended in a void of memory, perception, and time itself, a liminal zone where all possibilities of the village intersected. The elders appeared, their features sharper, more defined than ever, their shadows solid and commanding. And there, at the very center, the source of the hum revealed itself, an immense, faceless form, blacker than night yet luminous at the edges, radiating authority and awareness. The village had a heart far beyond the tree. It was this consciousness, older than any map, older than any life recorded, older than Claire herself. The faceless entity's presence pressed against Claire's mind, and she realized, with a shiver of terror, that this was the origin of the village, the reason it existed, and the arbiter of memory and reality. "You have returned," it said, not in words, but in thought and sensation, vibrating in every corner of her being. "Few see me. Fewer understand me. And the rarest, like you, endure to witness truth." Claire's pulse thundered in her ears. The village, all of it, the streets, the reenactments, the hidden figures, it's not just a town. It's alive. The entity's response was instantaneous, a rush of sensations and understanding. She perceived the village's consciousness as an organism, fed by memory and observation, existing because of those who remembered it, yet sustained through deliberate construction by its elders and herself. Then came the final revelation, a truth so vast it threatened to overwhelm her entirely. The village had never been merely a test or a trap, it was a fragment of her own mind, and yet it existed independently. Every memory she had believed was her own, every street she had walked, every neighbor she had known or imagined, had been shaped by her unconscious awareness, her imagination, and her participation in the cycles of observation. The elders, the hidden figures, even the nightly reenactments, were all extensions of her perception, crystallized and preserved into autonomous life by the entity at the heart of the village. In short, Claire had created the forgotten village even as it had created her, a symbiosis between consciousness and reality, impossible and eternal. The truth clawed at her understanding. Her life, her childhood, her parents, and friends, some real, some fabricated, had been woven into a construct she both inhabited and sustained. The faceless entity pulsed, conveying a sensation of infinite timelines, branching paths, and overlapping realities. "You cannot leave," it conveyed silently, "because leaving would erase not only yourself, but the village you sustain. And yet, you cannot fully remain without becoming aware of the illusion you have always been part of." Claire staggered backward, the enormity of the revelation threatening to shatter her mind. Every fear, every memory, every fragment of her identity had been manipulated, yet by forces within herself as much as outside her. She had been both creator and victim, observer and participant, subject and architect. Her eyes were drawn to the tree once more, now clearly a reflection of the faceless entity's consciousness, the tangible manifestation of the village's memory and structure. Its roots stretched into streets, houses, even the cobblestones she had walked countless times. Its branches reached upward into unseen skies, intertwined with shadowed figures and fragments of her own past. the hidden figures approached, bowing with a reverence that suggested both deference and fear, as if they too were subservient to a force they did not fully comprehend. Claire realized that the village's mechanics, the tests, the nightly reenactments, the loops of memory, had been designed to awaken her understanding, to prepare her for the moment when she could perceive the ultimate truth, that the village, the elders, and even herself were all nodes in a living network of consciousness. A cold, almost magnetic pull urged her forward. The faceless entity conveyed its final question, a test that could not be ignored. Will you embrace the truth, integrating fully with the village in its memory, accepting the weight of eternity? Or will you attempt to sever yourself, risking oblivion, erasure, and the collapse of all you have known? Claire's breath came in ragged gasps. To remain meant absorbing the entirety of the village's knowledge and history, becoming part of the eternal consciousness she had long feared and desired to understand. To leave meant stepping into nothingness, risking her identity and memories, relinquishing control, and abandoning the construct she had unknowingly built and sustained. She took a trembling step toward the tree, then another, feeling the pulse of the village sync with her heartbeat. In that instant, clarity struck. Her fear had been both a warning and a guide. To reject the village was to deny herself, to attempt freedom would mean erasure. To accept it was to transcend fear, to integrate, and to embrace both the horror and the majesty of her own creation. Every whispered fragment, every shadowed figure, every twisted street had led to this moment, the convergence of memory, perception, and reality. Claire exhaled deeply, grounding herself, and made the choice. Her hands touched the tree once more, fully, deliberately, surrendering herself to the village. The air exploded with sensation, light and shadow intertwined, the hidden figures bowed and dispersed, and the faceless entity's presence merged seamlessly with her consciousness. She felt her mind expand, perceiving timelines, streets, memories, and possibilities simultaneously. Every fragment of the village, the elders, the nightly reenactments, the forgotten alleys, the shifting houses, became part of her understanding, and she became part of it, a guardian and participant, a witness and creator, forever entwined in the living, breathing heart of the forgotten village. And in the silence that followed, Claire understood the final, terrifying truth: the village was eternal because she now was eternal within it, and she had always been both the observer and the observed, the creator and the created. Nothing she had believed, nothing she had remembered, was separate from the village, because she had never truly existed outside of it.